There is a moment in Darcey and Georgie's story that I keep coming back to, and it has nothing to do with the crying, the lashes, or the wine glasses. It is a group text. Darcey, in what she clearly thought was a power move, added her father Mike to a text conversation with Georgie specifically to pressure Georgie into paying his share of their Miami rent. That is the moment. That single screenshot of a text thread tells you more about the financial architecture of their relationship than anything the TLC cameras ever captured in a sit-down confessional. Because think about what that actually means. A grown woman with a production deal, a fashion brand, and a reality TV platform had to loop her father into a group chat to extract rent money from the man she was calling her equal partner, her future, her person. That is not a relationship with a payment dispute. That is a dynamic where one person holds all the financial exposure and the other person knows it and uses it. Today, I want to talk about money. Specifically, the money that Darcey Silva may have spent, lost, co-signed for, or handed over in the course of this relationship, and what the aftermath of her split with Georgie actually looks like beyond the filtered TikToks and the healing era captions. There are rumors circulating in the 90-day community, some of them pretty serious, about the state of Darcey's finances post-Georgie. I am going to be honest with you about what I actually know, what I'm genuinely speculating on, and where I think the truth probably sits. My thesis going in is this. Whatever happened financially between Darcey and Georgie, the pattern that led to it was visible on camera the entire time. And I think people have spent so much energy analyzing whether Georgie is a villain that they have missed the more uncomfortable question, which is whether Darcey's spending and her financial choices in this relationship were a form of buying love, and whether she knew that on some level the whole time. That is a harder conversation than, did he steal her credit card number? It is also a more honest one. So, let's get into it. Before we talk about the rumors, let me set up what we actually watched. Darcey Silva entered the 90-day franchise through Before the 90 Days, where she was pursuing a Dutch model named Jessie Meester. That relationship aired somewhere between 2017 and 2019 across multiple seasons, and the defining feature of it, at least from a financial standpoint, was Darcey's apparent willingness to fly internationally, fund trips, and center her identity around a man who was, by every public indication, not that interested in committing. Jessie eventually became one of those people who turned their reality TV stint into a coaching brand, which is its own phenomenon. But the point is that Darcey had already demonstrated a pattern before Georgie ever walked into the picture. She then appeared in another season of Before the 90 Days with a British man named Tom Brooks, and that relationship also ended badly, with a pretty memorable scene about whether Darcey had gained weight that became a minor viral moment. After Tom, she and her twin sister Stacey got their own spin-off, Darcey and Stacey, which has run for several seasons, and which is essentially a show about two sisters navigating relationships, fashion, cosmetic procedures, and family drama simultaneously. Georgi Rusev entered Darcey's life and the franchise through that spin-off. He is Bulgarian, he came to the US on some kind of visa situation, and the relationship moved extremely fast, which in the 90-day world is saying something. Within a relatively short window, they were talking about marriage, making big joint plans, and sharing living space in Miami, which is an extraordinarily expensive city to be splitting rent in if one of the people in the arrangement is not consistently pulling their financial weight. Now, the show documented some of the financial friction. The group text incident I mentioned is the clearest example. There was also ongoing tension about what Georgie was contributing versus what Darcey was covering, and the conversation had a pattern that a lot of viewers recognized, which is Darcey framing everything as a team effort while also being the person whose name was on everything. What the show did not document in detail, and what has become the source of a lot of community speculation, is what happened to the finances specifically after their split. I want to be clear here because this matters. I do not have verified financial records, eviction filings, or any documentation that would let me tell you with confidence what Darcey's credit situation looks like right now. What I have is the same thing you have, which is a documented pattern of behavior on the show, a community that has been piecing together social media breadcrumbs, and a read on the dynamic that I think is worth taking seriously. The rumors that are circulating go something like this. Georgi, during the relationship, had access to credit lines or cards associated with Darcey's accounts, that he used that access in ways that benefited him more than her. When the relationship ended and he returned to Bulgaria, Darcey was left holding financial obligations that she was not in a position to easily cover, and that the Miami apartment, which she had been using as a backdrop for her influencer content, and which carried a rent that suggested a budget above what her actual income could comfortably sustain, became a specific crisis point. None of that is confirmed. All of it is speculative. And I want to be careful here because Georgi deliberately destroyed Darcey's credit as an exit strategy is an extremely serious allegation that I cannot support with documentation. What I can say is that the financial dynamic on the show was already visibly lopsided, and that people who end up in financially lopsided relationships with partners who then leave tend to have a cleanup period that is not pleasant. Let me talk about the Miami apartment specifically, because this is where my read gets a little sharper. My impression, and this is just my impression based on watching the show and the social content that came out of it, is that the Miami apartment was doing double duty. It was a place to live, yes, but it was also a set. It was the visual evidence of a lifestyle. Darcey has built her public identity around a very specific aesthetic that involves luxury signifiers, and the Miami high-rise fits that aesthetic in a way that, I don't know, a two-bedroom in Stamford, Connecticut does not. So part of the financial pressure to maintain that apartment was not really about the apartment. It was about the image the apartment made possible. That is a form of spending that is really hard to walk back from because it is not purely about utility. You are not just paying for shelter. You are paying for the version of yourself that lives there. And when the person you were partly performing that version of yourself for has left the country, you are still on the hook for the rent. But now you have also lost the narrative that justified it. I think Darcey is genuinely capable of overspending in the service of a story she is telling about her life. I am not saying that to be cruel. I think a lot of people do this, especially people whose income is tied to their public image. There is a feedback loop where the appearance of success attracts the opportunities that fund the appearance of success, and if something disrupts the cycle, it can unravel quickly. My read is that Georgi's departure, regardless of what he did or did not do with any credit accounts, would have left Darcey in a financially precarious position, even if he had been the most financially responsible partner in the world, because the spending level was already set above what was sustainable without a specific income trajectory continuing to hold. Now, here is where the rumor gets interesting to me, and also where I want to be most careful. The idea that Georgi was strategically running up debt before leaving, using Darcey's credit infrastructure to fund a parallel setup in Bulgaria, is the kind of narrative that is very satisfying if you already dislike him. It makes him a villain with a plan, which is tidier than the messier reality that most financial damage in relationships comes not from calculated evil, but from a combination of entitlement, avoidance, and two people who have very different relationships to money and never actually talked about it honestly. My honest guess, and I am fully labeling this as a guess, is that Georgi was not pulling off some Ocean's 11 scheme. I think he is a person who got comfortable letting Darcey's money fill the gaps, who may have used credit access carelessly or selfishly, and who, when things started to collapse, chose leaving over confronting the mess. That is bad. It is also just a thing that happens in relationships where one person has significantly more financial exposure than the other. The more damaging version of this story, to me, is actually the Papa Mike dynamic. Because there were hints on the show that Darcey's relationship with her father financially is complicated in ways the show never fully unpacked. The group text incident suggests that Mike is in the loop on her housing payments in some capacity, which raises questions about whether Darcey's financial independence is as complete as her brand suggests. I am not saying her father is funding her whole life. I genuinely do not know that, but the fact that he was the person she called in to apply pressure about rent suggests that the money in her world does not flow the way she presents it. If there is any truth to the rumor that Papa Mike eventually drew a line about the Miami apartment, that would fit a pattern that was already visible. That would be a man who has been supplementing a lifestyle, saying, at some point, I am not subsidizing this particular situation anymore. That is a reasonable position for a parent to take. It is also, if it happened that way, A really difficult thing to absorb when you are also dealing with a split, because it means the floor underneath the floor has also shifted. I want to address the counter-argument here seriously, because I think a lot of the framing around this story is unfair to Darcey in ways that are worth naming. The dominant narrative in the 90-day community, and I have seen this across a lot of commentary on this situation, is that Darcey is primarily a cautionary tale about poor choices. She spent too much, trusted too easily, let the wrong person too close, and is now facing consequences that she essentially constructed herself. There is something to read. I have been making a version of that argument in this very video. But I also think the "she did this to herself" framing can slide pretty quickly into something that lets other people off the hook. Georgi was an adult who made choices. If he had access to financial accounts and used them in ways that primarily benefited him, that is not just Darcey's pattern of poor choices. That is a person making a choice to take advantage of someone who trusted them. Those things can both be true. The dynamic that made her vulnerable was partly her own construction, and the person who took advantage of that dynamic is still responsible for doing that. The other thing I want to say is that Darcey has been doing this publicly for years. The crying, the heartbreak, the next relationship. The same patterns. And I think there is something that gets lost in the commentary cycle, which is that the people watching and critiquing and theorizing are doing so on a platform where Darcey's pain is the content. She is not the only person in this equation who is getting something out of how this story is told. What I actually believe when I step back from the speculation, I think Darcey spent beyond what was prudent to maintain a relationship and a lifestyle that were both performing stability they did not actually have. I think Georgi was either careless or deliberately selfish about the financial access he had, and I lean toward careless but entitled rather than calculated schemes, because that tends to be what people actually do. I think the aftermath of the split was genuinely difficult financially, probably in ways she is not fully disclosing publicly. And I think the heavily filtered content she put out afterward, the "we are just taking space" framing, the healing era branding, was doing real work to cover something she was not ready to talk about. Whether that something is eviction, credit damage, debt she is managing, or just the ordinary financial strain of suddenly being the only person responsible for a lifestyle built for two people's incomes, I do not know. I am not going to pretend I do. What I know is that the group text exists. We saw it. We saw what it meant. And everything that has happened since, from the split to the rumors to the social media content, follows a logic that was already there in that screenshot. One person in that relationship was holding all the exposure. The other person knew it. And when it ended, only one of them had to deal with the bill. That is not unique to Darcey. It is not unique to reality TV. It is a pattern that plays out in a lot of relationships, and the version of it that happens to unfold in front of cameras just has better lighting and a wider audience. The question of whether Darcey will change the underlying pattern, not the apartment or the man, but the actual thing underneath all of it, is honestly more interesting to me than any specific rumor about credit cards, because the rumor has an answer that is either yes or no. The pattern question does not, and that is probably why she keeps coming back to our screens, whether she means to or not.